I closed one browser tab at 8:59 a.m. on a Thursday, and by noon the company had lost $8.2 million. Name's Gary Sullivan, 48 years old, and I'd been holding that place together with duct tape and Navy discipline for the better part of 15 years. But let me back up a bit, because this story starts way before that Thursday morning when everything went sideways. You know that feeling when you can smell trouble coming? Like when the air gets thick before a storm? That's exactly what it felt like when Austin Reynolds walked through our office doors 3 months ago. New COO, fresh MBA from some fancy school back east, protein shake in one hand and a smirk that screamed, "I'm here to disrupt everything you old guys built." Austin was one of those guys who used words like synergize and pivot in normal conversation, the kind who'd never actually built anything with his hands but could recite quarterly projections like scripture. He had that corporate shark look, expensive suit, perfect teeth, and eyes that sized up everything in terms of cost centers and profit margins. I should have seen it coming when they quietly changed my business cards. One day I'm Director of Infrastructure Operations, next day I'm Senior Systems Specialist. No meeting, no explanation, no discussion. Just a stack of new cards on my desk with a smaller title and the same salary. Death by paperwork, they call it in the corporate world. A demotion dressed up as a lateral move. But here's the thing nobody understood. While Austin was busy restructuring org charts and talking about agility initiatives in conference rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, I was the guy keeping the lights on. Literally. The custom auto-renewal API I'd built over 3 years processed millions in client contracts every month with a 99.9% success rate. It handled compliance across 3 regulatory bodies, managed international time zones and currencies, and basically ran itself like a Swiss watch. This wasn't some off-the-shelf software we'd bought from a vendor. This was custom-built infrastructure that I'd architected from the ground up, tested under every possible failure scenario, and maintained through 2 major system migrations. Every line of code, every database connection, every security protocol. I knew it all because I'd built it all. Nobody asked how it worked. They just bragged about it to investors. Fully automated renewal system, they'd say in board meetings. Seamless integration with 0 human intervention required. Austin loved that last part especially. 0 human intervention. Made it sound like the system ran on fairy dust and good intentions instead of 15 years of accumulated knowledge and 3 a.m. emergency patches. The layoff started with the usual corporate theater. First round came with donuts and fake sympathy from HR. "Unfortunately, we have to make some difficult decisions," they announced to a room full of people who'd built the company from nothing. "These changes will position us for future growth." Translation: the investors wanted better margins, and cutting salaries was easier than finding new revenue. Second round was just Slack messages, people vanishing from channels mid-conversation like they'd been raptured. You'd be discussing a project with someone on Tuesday, and by Wednesday their avatar was grayed out and their desk was empty. No goodbye meetings, no knowledge transfer, just gone. Third round wasn't even called layoffs. Organizational streamlining, the memo said. I read it while microwaving my coffee for the 4th time that morning, watching the numbers tick down on the microwave display, and wondering if I'd be next. My desk stayed in the same spot, right between the broken thermostat that kept the office either freezing or sweltering, and that ancient printer that sounded like it was dying a slow, painful death every time someone sent a job to it. But everything else shifted around me like I was a rock in a stream and the water was just flowing past. Meeting invites stopped, including me. The group photo by the elevator got cropped tighter each month, faces disappearing until it looked like a completely different company. Nameplates disappeared from doors. The coffee machine got moved to the executive floor. Small changes. But you notice when you've been somewhere long enough to see the patterns. I watched it all happen with the patience you learn in the Navy. Observe, assess, prepare, but don't react until you understand the full situation. 24 years in the service teaches you that panic is the enemy of good decision-making. You wait, you watch, and when the time comes to act, you do it with precision and purpose. Austin brought in his golden boy about a month after the restructuring. Kid couldn't have been older than 27, wearing sneakers that probably cost more than my truck payment and carrying himself like he'd just graduated from disrupting someone else's business model. His name was Caleb Winters, and he introduced himself as a solutions architect with experience in next-generation infrastructure paradigms. I knew we were in trouble the moment he opened his mouth in his first technical meeting. So couldn't we just port the entire back end of blockchain infrastructure for faster velocity? he asked, genuinely serious, while the room full of actual engineers tried not to laugh. I just nodded and made a mental note. This kid has no idea what he's talking about, but Austin thinks he's the future. That's when I knew for certain that this wasn't about improving anything. It was about replacing everything, starting with the people who'd built it in the first place. They made Caleb director of digital innovation within 2 weeks, gave him a team, a budget, and orders to modernize our legacy systems. My systems. The ones that actually worked while everyone else's crashed on weekends and needed constant babysitting. I tried to be a team player through all of this. Really, I did. The Navy teaches you to respect the chain of command, even when you think the officers making decisions have never been in the field. You salute, you follow orders, you do your job with pride even when the people above you are making choices that smell like disaster from a mile away. When Austin asked for documentation on the renewal architecture, I spent 3 days putting together a comprehensive breakdown, 23 pages of technical specs, system dependencies, compliance requirements, and integration points. I included flowcharts, database schemas, and most importantly, the single most critical detail buried in Section 12 of the appendix. The vendor contract compliance requirement, the thing that made everything else possible. See, 3 years ago when I was negotiating the licensing agreement with our renewal vendor, I'd insisted on a specific clause. The system would only function with an active named officer maintaining credentials in the vendor portal. Not a team login, not a shared account, not some generic company email address. One person with verified identity maintaining active authentication tokens. That person was me. Gary Sullivan, the only name on the compliance certificate, the only identity tied to the vendor's security protocols, the only human being on planet Earth who could authorize the system to keep running. I tried to explain this to the previous management team, but they were too busy chasing the next funding round to care about infrastructure details. Just handle it, Gary, they'd say. You're the expert. So I handled it, documenting everything, creating backup procedures, building fail-safes that would give us time to transition if something happened to me. Austin's response to my 23-page technical document? A thumbs-up emoji. Not even a thanks, or I'll review this. Just that little yellow hand giving me a digital pat on the head like I was a kindergartner who'd just shown him a crayon drawing. That should have been my first clue that we were heading for disaster. But I'm old school. You give people the benefit of the doubt. You assume good faith until proven otherwise. You follow proper channels, even when the channels are run by people who think emojis count as professional communication. Caleb started making changes immediately. Small ones at first, optimizing database queries that had been running perfectly for years, streamlining API endpoints that handled edge cases he didn't understand, modernizing security protocols that were already exceeding industry standards. Each change broke something else. The system that had run with 99.9% uptime suddenly needed weekly emergency patches. Client renewals that used to process automatically started requiring manual intervention. Compliance reports that generated themselves began throwing errors that took hours to debug. I spent my nights fixing what Caleb broke during the day. No overtime pay, no recognition, just the quiet satisfaction of keeping the lights on while everyone else slept. My wife started leaving dinner in the microwave because she knew I'd be home late again, debugging some improvement that had made everything worse. The breaking point should have been when Caleb suggested we deprecate the legacy vendor integration and build our own compliance engine from scratch. He pitched it in a meeting where he used the word blockchain 14 times in 20 minutes, describing a system that would take 2 years to build and wouldn't meet half our regulatory requirements. Austin loved it. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need, he said, nodding like Caleb had just solved world hunger. When can we start the transition? I cleared my throat and asked if anyone had reviewed the legal implications of changing our compliance framework mid-contract. Silence. Then Austin looked at me with that patronizing smile he'd perfected and said, "Gary, we appreciate your concerns about the old way of doing things, but we need to move fast in this market. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet." Breaking eggs. That's what he called potentially violating federal compliance regulations and risking our entire client base. I nodded politely and made another mental note. These people have no idea what they're destroying. The vendor contract was something I'd negotiated in a beige conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and crushed dreams. Legal had sent an intern who spent most of the meeting scrolling through his phone. It had sent nobody. The vendor rep was calling in from Belgium on a connection so bad that every other word got cut off. But I'd done my homework, read every line, every clause, every footnote in the 47-page agreement. I knew exactly what we were signing and what it would mean for our system architecture. When they got to Section 8.7, the named officer requirement, I volunteered my own name without hesitation. Someone needs to be responsible, I told the room. Might as well be the guy who built the integration. Nobody argued, nobody cared. They were just happy to check another box and move on to the next meeting. That decision, made in 5 seconds of corporate indifference, had just become the most important leverage point in the company's entire technical infrastructure. I'd tried to hand off the named officer responsibility twice in the past 18 months. First time, I wrote up a transition plan and scheduled training sessions for 3 other senior engineers. "We'll circle back after Q3, Austin had said. "Too much going on right now." Second time, I sent a formal request to legal and copied Austin directly. "We need redundancy in our compliance architecture," I wrote. "Single points of failure are unacceptable for a system this critical." Austin's response came 6 days later. "Let me align on roles before we make changes. Thanks." Aligning roles, as it turned out, meant firing everyone who remembered why things worked the way they did and replacing them with people who thought disruption was more important than stability. The final straw came 3 weeks later during what Austin called a strategic alignment call. Corporate speak for someone's about to get publicly humiliated, while the rest of us pretend it's a team-building exercise. I'd been through enough of these in my 15 years to know the script by heart. The email invite had that special corporate tone that meant trouble. Mandatory employment alignment and loyalty confirmation. All senior staff. The subject line alone was enough to make my stomach turn. In the Navy, when officers started talking about loyalty, it usually meant someone was about to get thrown overboard. I logged in 3 minutes early, like always. Old habits from the service. Be ready, be professional, be prepared for whatever nightmare they're about to unleash. My home office was quiet except for the hum of my computer and the distant sound of my neighbor's lawnmower. Normal Thursday morning sounds while my professional world was about to explode. Austin's face filled the top center of my screen, that practice smile he probably rehearsed in the mirror every morning. His backdrop was some generic corporate office setup, motivational posters, fake plants, the kind of sterile environment that screamed, "I'm important but have no personality." The first 50 minutes were the usual corporate garbage. Slides full of buzzwords like synergy optimization and cross-departmental realignment. Austin talked about reducing operational redundancy, which was code for more firings. He mentioned enhancing team velocity, which meant making fewer people do more work. He used the phrase right-sizing our human capital 6 times, as if people were just numbers on a spreadsheet instead of human beings with families and mortgages. I watched colleagues' faces on the grid of video windows. Some nodded along like bobbleheads, desperate to look engaged. Others had that 1,000-yard stare of people who'd already mentally checked out. A few were clearly multitasking, probably updating their resumes while Austin droned on about corporate synergy. Then his tone shifted. The fake friendliness dropped away like a mask slipping, and suddenly he was looking directly into his camera. At me. "Before we close," Austin said, letting his words hang in the digital air like a sword about to drop, "I want to address some concerning reports we've received." My heart did one long, slow thump. I knew whatever came next wasn't going to be good. "We've had reports of dual engagement activities," he continued, using that careful corporate language that meant he was about to destroy someone's reputation without saying anything actionable. "Consulting work that may conflict with employment agreements." The Zoom room went dead quiet. Even the sales guys, who usually kept chatting through anything that didn't directly affect their commissions, stopped their side conversations. You could feel the collective intake of breath, that moment when everyone realizes they're about to witness a public execution. There was no consulting work. I hadn't had time to breathe without logging it in some project management system, let alone take on outside clients. My evenings were spent fixing Caleb's mistakes, and my weekends were spent documenting systems that nobody else bothered to understand. But Austin didn't need facts. He needed theater. "Gary," he said, leaning into his webcam like a news anchor delivering breaking news, "I think the team deserves some clarity here." The way he said my name made my skin crawl, like he was talking to a child who'd been caught stealing cookies. Condescending, disappointed, already convinced of my guilt before asking any questions. "Pick a side," Austin continued, his voice dropping to that fake, sincere tone that executives use when they want to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. "Pick a paycheck, ours or the other one." The digital silence that followed was deafening. 37 people on the call, and you could have heard a pin drop in any of their home offices. I could see my own reflection in my monitor. Gray hair, tired eyes, 15 years of loyal service being reduced to a loyalty test by a guy who couldn't spell API if his MBA depended on it. But here's what Austin didn't understand about military training. When you get an impossible order from someone who doesn't know what they're asking for, you follow it exactly as given. No argument, no explanation, just precise execution of the command as stated. He'd told me to pick a paycheck. Fine, I'd pick one. So I didn't speak. Didn't defend myself, didn't beg, didn't give him the dramatic confrontation he was clearly hoping for. I just moved my mouse slowly, deliberately, and clicked the X on one browser tab. To everyone watching, it looked like nothing. Just a guy closing a window during another boring corporate meeting. But that tab was my active session with the vendor portal. The authentication dashboard that kept the compliance heartbeat running. The connection tied to my named officer credentials that pinged the system every 4 hours to confirm Gary Sullivan was still authorized to maintain the license. The moment I closed it, a single line updated in a server log somewhere in Belgium. Session terminated. Named officer credential status inactive. Authentication token expired. Austin squinted at his screen, maybe confused that I wasn't putting up a fight. He'd clearly expected tears, expected begging, expected some kind of emotional breakdown that would justify his power play. Instead, he got Navy discipline and 15 years of accumulated professional patience. "We'll discuss follow-up offline," he said, that oily corporate tone sliding across the call like spilled motor oil. "Thanks everyone for your attention to this important alignment discussion." But there wouldn't be any follow-up discussion. Not for him. I muted myself, turned off my camera, and sat back in my chair. Around me, people were starting to drop off the call, probably rushing to update their LinkedIn profiles or text their spouses about the latest corporate drama. They had no idea that the real show was just beginning. Because while Austin was busy playing corporate politics, the system that processed $8.2 million in monthly renewals had just lost its authorization to function. And the only person who could restore it was sitting in a quiet home office, drinking cold coffee, and feeling absolutely no obligation to fix the mess that someone else had just created. The first error appeared at 9:47 a.m., exactly 48 minutes after I closed that browser tab. Just a small glitch in the renewal queue. One mid-tier client in Phoenix couldn't process their monthly contract. The kind of hiccup that usually gets chalked up to network lag or a temporary server blip. Nothing to panic about. By 9:52, the automated retry had failed. By 10:15, 2 enterprise clients worth 6 figures each were flagged in renewal jeopardy. Still no red alerts blasting through the office because the system had backup protocols built in. Fail-safes I'd designed to give us time to fix problems before they became disasters. But those fail-safes were starting to spin their wheels like tires stuck in mud, and they were all tied to one thing: my authentication token with the vendor portal. At 10:23, someone in DevOps finally noticed the pattern and sent a message to legal. "Are we experiencing a license sync delay? System can't ping the named officer key for renewal authorization." At 10:28, legal replied, "That's Gary Sullivan, right? He handles all the vendor compliance stuff." At 10:31, someone tried calling my work phone. It went straight to voicemail because I'd forwarded all my calls to HR. If they wanted to talk about my dual employment, they could start with the people who handled employee relations. At 10:45 exactly, the renewal engine collapsed. Not with error messages or warning bells, just silence. Clean, professional, total system shutdown. Every automated renewal stopped processing. Every compliance check started returning the same message: license invalid. Named officer signature expired. Contact vendor for resolution. In that instant, $8.2 million in projected monthly revenue went into free fall. I sat in my kitchen that afternoon, drinking a beer I'd been saving for a special occasion. Seemed like the right time to crack it open. My phone buzzed constantly. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages that started polite and got increasingly desperate. I deleted them all without listening. The emergency board meeting happened without me. They tried everything they could think of. Called the vendor, who patiently explained that no, the license couldn't be transferred without the original named officer's authorization. Minimum 10 business days processing time, assuming all paperwork was correctly filed. Can we override it somehow? Austin apparently asked, probably sweating through his expensive shirt by now. No, came the reply from Belgium. That would violate compliance integrity protocols. Your company specifically requested this security framework. Gary Sullivan designed it this way. They tried to assign someone else as named officer. Denied. The system was locked to my identity, my authentication tokens, my digital signature. They tried to access the vendor portal with generic credentials. Blocked. They even called their lawyer to see if they could force the vendor to unlock the system. The lawyer probably laughed. Contracts are contracts, especially ones involving federal compliance requirements. By 2 p.m., 3 major clients had triggered breach clauses in their contracts. One had legal counsel CC'd on the first complaint. Another had already suspended payments pending resolution of what they called systemic compliance failures. The financial bleeding was getting worse by the hour, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do about it except ask me nicely to fix what Austin had broken. They tracked me down that evening. Not Austin. He'd apparently locked himself in his office, probably updating his own resume. The founder called me directly, voice tired and strained. "Gary, we need to talk," Thomas Crawford said. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there," I said. Professional courtesy, even in warfare. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the private conference room. No laptops, no assistants, no recording devices. Just Thomas, the CFO, legal, Austin, and me sitting around a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. I arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. Professional standards matter, even when you're negotiating with people who've just discovered how much trouble they're in. I didn't come with lawyers or demands or threats. Just a manila folder containing a printout of the vendor contract, section 8.7 highlighted in blue ink, the clause they'd all ignored for 3 years while bragging about the system to investors. "You'll get your license back," I told them, voice steady as concrete, "but not for free." Nobody spoke. Thomas read the highlighted section twice, then looked up at me with something that might have been respect or fear. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. "What are your terms?" he asked quietly. "Triple severance package," I said. "Retroactive to when Austin restructured my position 3 months ago. No non-compete clause, no non-disclosure agreement. I walk away clean, you fix your compliance mess, and we part ways professionally." Austin started to object, probably about to say something about negotiating or finding alternatives. I raised one eyebrow. The look that used to quiet rowdy sailors when I was running a tech crew in the Navy. He closed his mouth. The CFO glanced at Thomas, who nodded once. Slow and heavy, like a man signing a peace treaty after losing a war he never should have started. "Agreed," Thomas said. I stood up, collected my folder, and headed for the door. As I walked past Austin's office, I could see through the glass walls. His nameplate was already gone from his desk, and he was putting his motivational books into a cardboard box. Apparently, the board had made some rapid personnel decisions while they were learning exactly how much money his leadership style had cost them. We didn't make eye contact. There was nothing left to say. 3 weeks later, my settlement check cleared. 6 months' salary, benefits, and what amounted to a very expensive lesson for a company that had confused disruption with destruction. I started my own consulting practice, specializing in exactly the kind of legacy system integration that younger engineers think they can improve, but usually just break. Austin's LinkedIn profile now lists him as seeking new opportunities in dynamic growth environments. Caleb lasted another 2 weeks before they figured out he'd been using ChatGPT to write code that didn't actually work. "Pick a paycheck," Austin had said. Turns out I picked the right one.